We are talking about the French Revolution. We are talking about the cause of the French Revolution. In 1789, Louis called for the Estates General. When he called for this Estates General, the situation became revolutionary. He did not have an agenda for this meeting. This Estates General was supposed to be attended by 3 representatives of the estate. There was the first estate, there was the second estate, and the third estate. On this day, the third estate went at a nearby tennis court. They took what was known as the tennis court oath, and they demanded that the meeting was supposed to be held in the same room with the first and the second estate. When Louis saw that the situation was becoming unbearable, he had to have this meeting in one room. This was a revolutionary victory. After the meeting, the third estate were so much excited. They went into towns, started mobilizing the people, and this marked the beginning of the French Revolution. The situation in France became chaotic. Revolts had to spread all over the cities in France. This led to the formation of the National Assembly. They formed the National Assembly. Why? It is because it was going to be a government that was going to represent the interest of all the French people. When the National Assembly was formed, the revolutionaries went on to formulate what they referred to as the National Guard. This National Guard was supposed to restore order in the country. During this particular period of time, there was no order in the country. Revolts were all over. People broke shops, they stole bread, they stole guns. So the situation was unbearable. And this explains why the National Guard was formed. It was led by Lafayette. When the National Guard was formed, order was restored, and it marked the beginning of the second incident, which was known as the storming of the Bastille. The revolutionaries went to the Bastille. The Bastille was a notorious jail in France. This is where the people who opposed Louis were imprisoned. For example, the philosophers, J.J. Rousseau, who once wrote that although a man was born free, he was always in chains. We talk about Voltaire. We talk about Montesquieu. These were some of the philosophers who opposed the reign or the ancient regime of Louis XVI. When they stormed this Bastille prison, the prisoners who were in this prison were released. The storming of the Bastille, it had great significance. It marked the end of royal despotism. It ushered the beginning of a new era in the history of France. People were now free to openly express themselves. It ushered again a new period in the history of France. This later on led to the formulation of the so-called the August Decrees. The August 4 Decrees were meant to provide laws which were supposed to be used to govern the people in the country. These August Decrees, they acted as a form of a constitution. Remember that during the causes of the French Revolution, Louis possessed all the political powers. It is said by Dennis Richards that the last time the government of France met was in 1614. So it meant that Louis had all the political powers in his hands. So the August 4 Decrees were meant to address the grievances that the people were having in the country. There are a number of laws that were formulated on these August 4 Decrees. Louis was supposed to rule with the help of the legislative assembly. Louis was not supposed to apply the Latreille decrets. The Latreille decrets were done away with. The people were now voting as individuals as opposed to what took place during the ancient regime, whereby they voted as states. So when the August 4 decrees were formulated, the revolutionaries, to make Louis sign these August 4 decrees, he refused. The refusal of Louis to sign the August 4 decrees angered the people, and it led the people to become harsh against Louis XVI. As a result of this, Louis, seeing the anger that the people had, he had to sign the August 4 decrees. After the signing of the August 4 decrees, the revolutionaries, they went a step further. They came up with what were known as the rights of men and citizens. These were the rights that were to protect the French people. They wanted the right to vote. They wanted the right to be tried by jury. They wanted liberalism, to be in a position to freely express themselves, to fully express their minds and their thoughts. They wanted the Latreille decrets to be done away with. When these rights of men and the citizens were formulated, the revolutionaries, they went on to Louis and to make Louis sign these decrees. Once again, Louis refused. But the revolutionaries had to force Louis to sign the rights of men and citizens. And this led to the next stage. It led to the so-called the March of Women to Versailles. When men went back home, they told their wives about what had transpired during the formulation of the rights of men and citizens. Men were the ones who were responsible for the formulation of these laws. Women were not important in the society. They remained behind home with children. So when they returned back home, they told their wives about the refusal of Louis to sign the rights of men and citizens. And this led the women to be angered. A week earlier, the prices of bread had increased. Life was becoming unbearable in the country. The price of goods had skyrocketed. The French money was consistently losing its value. So the women had to mobilize each other. When they mobilized each other, it resulted in this so-called the March of Women. The women marched to Versailles. They were joined by men who disguised in petticoats, who disguised in bras, who disguised in dresses. In Versailles, they had to force Louis to join them. Louis joined the revolutionaries, and he was brought to Paris, where he was housed in the house of the Tuileries, or in the Temple Court, the civil constitution of the clergy. The civil constitution of the clergy was meant to address the problems that were faced by the church. The priests were suffering during the time of Louis XVI. Their ways of life were miserable. Revolutionaries had to come up with this civil constitution of the clergy so that they could address the problems that the priests were facing. When this civil constitution of the clergy was formulated, they agreed that the Pope in Rome was not going to have a say over priests in France. They also agreed that the church lands were supposed to be taken, and they were supposed to be given to the revolutionaries. By being given land, it meant that the problems of poverty, the problems of starvation, the problems of hunger were going to be done away with. They also agreed that the number of the clergy was supposed to be reduced from 155 to 83. And this number was supposed to correspond with the departments that were created. They also agreed that the priests were now going to be paid by the state. They also agreed that people were going to be free to have a religion of their choice. When the civil constitution of the clergy were formulated, Louis was made to sign them. He refused to sign the so-called the civil constitution of the clergy. But the revolutionaries, they pressurized him. And as a result of pressure that he was given, he eventually signed the civil constitution of the clergy. The flight to Varennes. Louis signed the civil constitution of the clergy against his will. He was not pleased by the phrase which stated that the Pope in Rome was not going to have a say of a priest in France. This meant that his relations with the church or his relations with the Pope were going to be antagonized. He therefore decided to flee to Austria. And in Austria, they were going to influence the brother of Mary Antoinette, Leopold II, to mobilize the Allied powers, to mobilize the ultra-royalists or the emigres, so that they could come and stop the revolution. But unfortunately, they were caught in Varennes. When they were caught in Varennes, they were humiliated. Louis and Mary Antoinette were brought back to France. And when they were brought back to France, they were now housed in the inner side of the Temple Court. This was because they were now seen as dangerous threats to the revolution. Formation of political parties. The revolutionaries, after finishing the formulation of the Constitution consisted of the August Decree, the rights of men and citizens, and the civil constitution of the clergy. When these were through, they had to encourage the people to form political parties. During this particular period of time, these parties were known as clubs. A number of political clubs were formed. There was a club which was known as the Jacobins. These Jacobins were radical in their nature. They believed in violence. One of their most prominent leaders was Robespierre, who was a man of virtue, who was a man of justice. The Jacobins, they wanted to do away with monarchism. They wanted to bring a new era in the history of France. Another party that was formed was known as the Girondists. The Girondists were also against monarchism. They were also against the reign of Louis XVI. These Girondists were referred to as the leftists. Why? Because of their stance of being against the monarchism of Louis XVI. One of their supporters was Danton, who later on became a friend of Robespierre. The Cordillers were also against monarchism. They were also referred to as the leftists. They were, however, not as radical as the Jacobins. Another club that was formed was known as the Felons. The Felons were the supporters of monarchism. They were supporters of royal despotism. They were supporters of Louis XVI. These Felons did not want a change to occur in the country. The last club that was formed was known as the Center Party. The center party were the people who were at the center. They did not know what they wanted. They favored violence that was being perpetuated by the groups on the left. At the same time, they were in favor of the felons, so they were at the center. So these clubs were formed, and when they were formed, the people were encouraged to start campaigning. If they won, it meant that they were going to form the next government. Elections were later on held, and when these elections were held, the Center Party managed to win a number of votes in the Legislative Assembly. This marked the end of the National Assembly.